Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. Today I'm going to dive into a common mistake, kind of inaccuracy that a lot of people have been talking to me about. So it's one of the frequent questions that comes up when people book calls with me, sometimes on comments in our videos, etc. And it just highlights a misconception that people have that I think is really, really important to if you want to lower your international tax, and in particular, if you're planning on relocating abroad and lowering your international tax. So hopefully this is going to be really helpful to you. And yeah, let's dive in. Before we do that, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Really appreciate it. Hit the subscribe button, nail the notification bell. Make sure you don't miss out on any of our videos. There's a little all notifications thing there. And we try to produce great content for you every single day. So if you like this video, go back and check out some of the others. Lots of content there. And if you're interested at all in help with relocating abroad, with paying lower tax, with getting structured internationally, etc., please reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer. There's a link in the description below. Or you can check out our websites, offshorecitizen.net, offshorecapitalist.com, and send us a message through there. Okay, so the subject that I want to talk about is tax residency. And the basic question that I've been getting a lot from people is they will say, how long do I need to spend in this place in order to be tax resident there? And this mostly is not a particularly valid question, okay? The subject is usually, the question is far less about where you are tax resident and much more about where you are not tax resident. Okay, I'm going to say that again. What you should be focused on is not, what do I have to do to be tax resident here? And instead be focused on, what do I have to do to not be tax resident in some other place, usually the place you're coming from, right? Now, sometimes being not tax resident somewhere else means you need to be tax resident somewhere else, but often not. So for instance, if you were to look at a country like Czech Republic, right? Czech Republic has a fairly straightforward test for determining whether you're resident or not resident. You could look at some place like UK, right? If you move away from UK, they have the statutory residency test. You'll notice that nowhere in the statutory residency test does it say resident of some other place, okay? That is not one of the criteria. Okay, if you get into tax treaties and things like this and tiebreaker rules, etc., it's a little bit of a different situation. But generally speaking, your main focus should be on what do I have to do to not be resident somewhere else? And why is this really, really important? First of all, because it's a fallacy that you need to be resident somewhere for tax purposes. You can be not tax resident anywhere in certain cases, right? Not in all cases, but in certain cases. Second of all, you could be in a situation where you qualify for tax residency in some country. So let's use Cyprus as an example. Okay, you can go to Cyprus, you can spend 60 days a year in Cyprus, and so long as you don't spend 183 days in some other place, you can be resident for tax purposes in Cyprus, okay? So people might say, great, yeah. Well, here's the reality. That doesn't necessarily mean that if you came from Australia, that Australia is going to consider that you're not tax resident in Australia. And that's the real problem, right? The real thing that you probably relocated for was not so much to be resident in someplace else for tax purposes, right? You weren't like, oh, hey, I just want to pay taxes in XYZ country. No, you were probably thinking, hey, the place where I'm coming from is really punitive and they're beating me down and it's terrible and I don't think it's fair. I think that what I'm contributing compared to what I'm getting back doesn't make sense. And I'm looking at these huge gains that I'm getting in my business, in my investments, etc. And you know what? I think it would make sense for me to relocate and not pay those big taxes, right? And the whole point is, so the key is getting away from there, right? Keep in mind the objective, getting away from there, not necessarily getting to here. Like I said, some countries won't allow you to not be tax resident there without being resident somewhere else, right? In the absence of some other residency, you'll default back. But that's not super common, okay? There's a lot of cases where that is definitely not the case. And so I think it really helps to understand the rules of the place that you're coming from pertaining not so much to their residency, but to their non-residency, okay? How do you become non-resident? Because the big thing is you don't want, it's not like you suddenly achieved some wonderful thing if you're tax resident in both places. In fact, your situation probably got worse, right? So the classic example is people who want to move to Portugal, right? Very popular for people to move to Portugal today. Some people want to move to Dubai and they'll say to me, how long do I have to spend in Dubai to be tax resident in Dubai? I said, well, Dubai doesn't even have taxes, so the concept of tax residency is kind of a bizarre one in Dubai. And okay, maybe it applies under a tax treaty, maybe you can't qualify under the tax treaty, maybe there is no tax treaty, things like this. But usually that's not the thing. Usually the thing is, what do you have to do to not be tax resident in the country that you came from? That probably is going to mean spending less than a certain threshold of time there. Depending on the country, that can be anywhere from, 30 to 183 days in a year, right? It probably means separating your major ties, right? You don't have dependents there. Your spouse isn't there. You don't have a permanent home there. Not to say that you can't be non-resident there with those things. In theory, you could in some situations, but this is probably something, and you probably have to go through some sort of an exit procedure, like an exit filing. You're probably gonna at least have to do those three things. And so pay attention to that, okay? Pay attention to that. Make sure you like reframe your thinking to say, hey, listen, I don't like the consequences of being tax resident in this country. What must I do to not be tax resident in this country? And as soon as you start thinking that way, what you're going to realize is that for many countries around the world, this opens up a plethora of opportunities. Now, some people might say, well, hang on a minute, don't banks require that I'm tax resident somewhere? I did a video on this when I talked about mismatch rules. Here's the thing. Banks require you to declare a residency. Banks are not in the business of figuring out whether you're a tax resident somewhere, okay? So for the purpose of the banks, what it means is you're gonna have a residency permit and you're gonna be able to prove your address. And you're gonna say, hey, listen, this is my tax residency. Whether the government in that country thinks you're a tax resident or not is not the concern of the banks. They're not gonna dive into that. That's not important. So yes, you need to, for the purpose of banks, have some residence somewhere, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're tax resident. And regardless, neither of those things necessarily mean you aren't tax resident in the place you're getting at. So focus on that. Anyway, I hope that helps. If you have any questions about it, put it in the comments below, or if you'd like to kind of go into detail. Every situation is unique, of course. So please reach out to me. You can book a call, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends. Really appreciate your support working on growing the channel. And if you have time and you're interested, you think, hey, these are interesting conversations, or if we like Michael, what he has to say, I have another channel you can go and check out. It's the Solutions Podcast. We do things talking about, basically the idea is to kind of focus on solutions instead of problems in the world and share kind of heterodox ideas for how to solve the biggest problems. We did some cool interviews, one with a lady who escaped from North Korea recently, super cool. And so check it out. Let me know if you like it. Appreciate your support, and we'll talk to you on the next video.